Hello, and thank you for joining our COVID-19 Data Challenge Lightning Talk. Today our talk is by Dr. Rachel Wu. She is an assistant professor of psychology at UC Riverside. She completed her PhD in psychology at Birkbeck, University of London. She's a developmental cognitive neuroscientist investigating how we attend to and learn relevant information across the lifespan. Dr. Wu received a Rising Star Award from the Association for Psychological Science and an NSF Career Award grant to investigate the role of learning new skills on cognitive and functional growth in older adults. She was in a rock band as a violinist for 7 years and is also a professional painter. Every few years, she learns to master new skills to gain a better understanding of the difficulties in being an adult learner. Her lightning talk today is titled, Learning and Resilience During COVID-19. Dr. Wu, welcome.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. And I'm really happy to be here with you guys. And I can field any questions you guys have about, kind of psychologically related phenomena related to COVID-19. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the backstory of how we started doing the COVID project that we did. And most of it was kind of turning lemons into lemonade because we had this ongoing huge project that had to stop suddenly, and then we had to figure out what to do with it. So the backstory basically is usually I start out talks by giving people this example. And so I can't see your faces, so I won't make this as interactive as I normally will. But what I typically would say is, imagine you have a neighbor named Nicholas who's, in his 70s, and he's struggling to learn English. He's just moved to the US maybe like 3 years ago. He has difficulty remembering where he left his favorite book. He watches TV all day. He doesn't really talk to anybody. What would you do? Typical responses that I would get would be, like, well, maybe I would stop by, if he was my neighbor, I would stop by maybe once a week, have lunch with him or something like that. And then there would usually be like silence, in the audience, because what else could you do, right? But then if you swap it to, well, actually Nicholas is a, let's say a 3-year-old who's struggling to learn English, has difficulty remembering where he left his favorite book, watches TV all day, doesn't talk to anyone. Your responses would be really different if you knew that that was a 3-year-old as opposed to a 70-year-old. And the whole point of, our research program is to highlight that, like this discrepancy, like why is there this difference, right? If we approached older adulthood this like in a similar way as we approach, childhood, infancy, younger adulthood, how many benefits could we, see in older adulthood that we don't currently see? And it's not to kind of say that older adults should be treated like infants or kids. It's not that. That's not the point. The point is that we provide so much opportunity for growth in infancy and childhood and young adulthood, and we don't provide a lot of these opportunities to people in older adulthood. And so the older adult, or just adult learning environment in general, but especially the older adult learning environment, there's very little access to teachers. So like if you wanted to find someone to teach you something, it's actually quite hard. You don't have like this guaranteed person, to teach you language, to teach you, social studies or whatever you learn in school, right? But also like, with infants, they have someone to teach them language 24/7. And we're very often inside our comfort zone. So we might learn things that we kind of already knew how to do. And so we're like getting better at, different things, but we're not as often learning completely new things. And so this will matter, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. There's also very often a fixed mindset. So like, I'm not good at art, so I'm not going to do anything in that direction, but I am, decent at like numbers or something. So I might do stuff in that direction. Or some other people might say, I'm terrible with numbers, I'm better at art, right? So they have like a fixed mindset about some things, and then like will shut down any of those options. And so to go back with the fixed mindset, if you're a parent of like a 1-year-old, you would never say to the 1-year-old, I don't think you're going to be good at walking, so I'm just not going to teach you how to walk. Like that just, you don't hear stuff like that, right? Um, and there's more often than not a very unforgiving environment for adults, especially older adults, because if you make mistakes, people might say, oh, you're senile, you're not as clever as you used to be, or even the adult learners themselves could be afraid of failure, so we're kind of defined by what we know the older we are. And if we are learning something, there's not often a very serious commitment to it. So, because you could be learning hobbies or whatever, but you could drop it after a couple months. The only thing that we're more serious about learning typically are things related to our job, that we can't give up. And so if we are learning something, we're learning really at most, one new skill at a time. It's not the same as kids, who are in school learning 5 subjects at the same time, because that's their full-time job. We have other stuff to do. So why is this an issue? Well, so there was this AARP survey that came out that said that a large number of adults don't learn information on a weekly basis. And this is really important because our argument is that learning is actually inherently part of resilience. And this is why the not going outside your comfort zone, issue is relevant. Because as things change, like with COVID, you have to be learning new stuff to be able to adapt to this new environment. So when infants and children are in a situation where they're not learning a lot of new stuff on a weekly basis, we actually call that deprivation. And so we try to get kids out of that situation as quickly as possible. But with older adults in that kind of situation, it's like almost like the norm. So this discrepancy is what we wanted to address in our research. And just to kind of drive home this point a little bit more, so maintenance, we talk a lot about with older adults, let's maintain our cognitive abilities, let's maintain, what we've got. But maintenance in childhood is actually the last resort. You would never keep a kid in first grade if they could actually go to second grade, third grade, fourth grade. So learning and growth in particular in learning is inherent in resilience for infants and kids. So we're taking these kind of principles and applying them to older adults in our research. So we had older adults, and we kind of brought them back to give them the course load of undergraduates in a way. So they had to take 3 classes over 1 quarter. And so these classes were things that they knew very little about. And so in this first study, it was Spanish, painting, and then how to use an iPad, but just like tech, stuff in general. And then in study 2, it was a slightly bigger, badder version, because the first version, we wanted to see if there would be like some kind of mutiny where like all of them would quit at one time. And so they didn't, and they kept, on it, and it was like about 6 participants. And so we did a bigger version after that. So for study 1, we had 6 in the intervention group and then 9 in a no contact control. And then study 2, we had 27. And so they learned different skills, but basically these are just skills that require teachers to teach you, because it's really hard to learn on your own. And that's kind of a barometer of how difficult is this thing I'm trying to learn. And then they were in it 12 to 15 weeks, and it ended up being about 15 hours a week, including homework that they had to do. So almost like a part-time job, learning. And they had these weekly discussion sessions on successful aging, what are barriers to learning and what's keeping you from, getting to where you want to go. So we tested them cognitively. We measured their working memory and their cognitive control. So altogether, we call it executive functions, basically. And so we tested them for study 1, we tested them at the beginning of the intervention, midpoint, and then the post-test, and then we've followed them up since. But I don't have the follow-up data here today, but we are looking at the follow-up data now. And then for study 2, we added this baseline, which was like before the intervention. So kind of like they were their own control group in a way. And so what we found was that the overall, you'll see that the red and the green lines go up to to higher levels in the blue line. So the blue line was the no contact control group. And so the green line is the first study with the 6 participants, and then the red line is the second study with the 27. And then from baseline to pretest, there was no intervention. So intervention started at pretest and then went, so basically by midpoint, by even just 6 weeks, participants were showing higher levels than the baseline, or than the control group. And so these numbers, it's not clear what these numbers actually mean. Like, what does it mean to have like a 1 or like a 0.5 or something, right? So if you take an average older adult off the street in Riverside and you ask them to do these assessments, they land around this level here. So that's where our participants started. That's where the kind of no contact control kind of just like hovered the whole time. And if you ask a bunch of undergraduates to take the same assessments, that's kind of where they would land. So these are the 18 to 20-year-olds undergraduates at UC Riverside. And so this line here is actually the average middle-aged adult. So this is like, I think average age was like 42 years. So these were like the staffers at UCR and, you know, just middle-aged adults in general. So this gap is a 30-year gap. Because the average age here for this older adult is about 72, so it's about a 30-year gap. So within 6 years, or within 6 weeks, you can bridge a large part of that 30-year gap, which is crazy. So we still need to replicate it with an even larger sample, even though we did replicate from the 6 to the 27. But we want to run a bigger, better version of this to really see if this is something that is as exciting as we think it is. And so we applied and got a grant from NSF to do this gigantic project where they would learn either 1 skill or 3 skills, because in our study they learned 3 skills at the same time. And so maybe 1 skill is enough. What is the dosing, right, that you need? And so our original study, we had 3 skills in 6 hours a week, which is a lot. And you really had to set aside a large chunk of your life, a large chunk of your time to be able to do this. But do you really need that to see all these effects that we saw? And so we had, 2 hours a week, 1 skill, whatever. So we started this study and in January, and then end of January. And so by the time COVID hit mid-March, we actually had to shut down. And so we didn't finish this intervention. We were so bummed. We put in like $100,000 into like this wave of data collection. And all of the participants were really upset. It was not a fun time, to be running a older adult intervention study where they had classes and had to come in together. So we thought, well, okay, let's turn lemons into lemonade. So after sulking for a little bit and then picking ourselves up, we thought, okay, well, the whole point of the intervention was to teach older adults when things change, you have to be learning stuff to adapt. But before, you don't want to get to a point where you have to be learning stuff, because then that's really hard, right? If you haven't been learning a lot of stuff and then suddenly you have to learn a bunch of new stuff, that's the hardest thing to do. And things have already just changed, right? So really you should be learning stuff to prepare yourself, to adapt to these different types of situations, so that when things do change, learning how to use Zoom, learning how to bank online, learning how to use, telehealth kind of apps or whatever, it's not as big of a deal, right? And so then we thought, well, what if these people, these older adults, these 60 or 70 older adults that we have been telling for the last 2 months that things might change and we have to, keep learning to adapt, and things will change at some point. We don't know when, and then things suddenly change. It's kind of like the test of did our message work, right? So we applied to NSF to collect some more data with these intervention participants and compare them to other older adults who didn't do our intervention, and see if their learning and adaptive behaviors, how much are they learning? So we get emails from our participants, that say, I learned how to do my nails, I learned how to fix my toilets, I learned, all of these things. And I didn't feel like that was normal behavior. I think that was something that came out of the intervention, which was really great. And also, what are their personal beliefs about age and abilities? Because we told them for 8 weeks, they can do this, you know, like you guys are amazing. You can do anything you put your mind to, you know, like that kind of motivational talk. And so, and to remove barriers that they, you know, that they encounter. So those two things, how do those differ between the older adults in the intervention and not? And how do those impact social connectivity? Because that's one of the main things that, you know, with physical distancing restrictions, social connectivity has really suffered. And then how does that all impact subjective well-being and loneliness? Because that's a huge issue with older adults who don't have a lot of social connections. So comparing older adults who were in the intervention and older adults who are not. And then we thought, well, it's actually, you know, a lifespan issue, right? Like, you know, up to young adulthood, up to like your last year of formal education, you're taught how to learn new stuff and, you know, how to adapt to changes and things like that. And then as we get older and older, that kind of training, let's say, isn't held up as much, right? And so what if the older adults in our intervention, what if they look similar to how younger adults might be adapting? Or maybe middle-aged adults or something, right? And so older adults who were not in the intervention, do they look, you know, similar and things like that? And with the younger adults, middle-aged adults, and older adults who weren't in our intervention, how are they doing? Like, we actually, at the time, we didn't know, you know, we still don't really know how are people actually adapting? What kinds of things are they trying to do, and, you know, with what frequency? And in particular in our region, we have about 30 to 40% in our sample that are non-white or lower SES, you know, kinds of populations. And so we really wanted to get, you know, a better understanding of what people are doing to you know, deal with the physical distancing restrictions and what kind of psychological toll it's having on people.